we bring in a friend who we've known for years and years and years. He's an author, relationship therapist, Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson.
Some expert advice on how we can all talk to them. Joining us now is relationship expert Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson. She's the author of Courageous Conversations Connect. Good morning, R.G.
Doctor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Janelle. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And as we mentioned, a lot of people just dealing with anxiety during all of this. What are your suggestions?
Some of the things that we need to remember is that this is temporary. This is temporary inconvenience for long-term gain. And as long as we stay healthy, Janelle, then everything else is recoverable.
Talk to your children about what's happening right now. What are the best ways to do that?
There's some do's and don'ts, right? So you want to tell them that you're going to be here. We're going to be okay. Kids want to know that they're secure and they're safe. So predictability, structure, and consistency. You also want to let them know you have a plan. And even if you don't have a plan, tell them that you're working on one.
Well, good morning. Good morning. This is yours truly, Dr. RG, for the Courageous Conversations Connect Space Quarantine Talks, and welcome to our crew, Connecting Relationships for Epic Wins. Boy, it is July 9th, 2020. This is our 17th week in quarantine and our 57th episode, believe it or not. And I am just tickled pink to have an amazing guest for you today. We're going to introduce her in just a bit as more people come onto the platform, but Charlotte's already on. Welcome to our IG family. Welcome to our YouTube family and our Facebook family. Do me a favor, share this link, tag a friend, let them know that we're on this platform at Quarantine Talks. And if you haven't yet, go over to YouTube and subscribe. It's the Ask Dr. RG YouTube page, AskDrArgie. Give us some thumbs up, some smiley faces, and some hearts. That helps with the algorithms. And we're going to have a courageous conversation today. Listen, all week, we're talking about how we don't quit, right? And specifically, we're talking about COVID-19 and racial healing conversations. Specifically today, when we bring on our guest, we're going to have a courageous conversation about how white women and Black women talk about engaging in racial healing, and how do we dismantle systemic racism, and how do we amplify this anti-racist movement, as well as Black Lives Matter. So you don't want to miss this one. Tag a friend, share this video, let other people know that we're on. We're going to be right back, and I'm going to bring on our guest, and then we're going to do our breathing exercises. So remember, think about who you're breathing for so that you can share that in the chat. We'll be right back. Hey crew, it's Dr. RG here again. It is July 9th, 2020, and we are having our Courageous Conversations Connect Space, our quarantine talks. And without further ado, I see you, Charlotte. Good morning. I want to invite our guest onto the show. Her name is Leah Love Avellino, and she's the Director of Head and Heart and CEO and co-founder of Spoke Circles. We're going to have a great conversation, so welcome to the show, Leah. Thank you for joining us, Leah.
So good to see your face again.
Oh, it's good to see you too. It's been a little while, right?
I know. Last time we were talking about pleasure and sex and intimacy.
Yeah, that was a great conversation that we had on the Tamron Hall show. We got to do that again. We got to have you come back to talk about that, because I'm sure there's been some changes in the level of intimacy for everyone that's quarantining. Hopefully, good things, but I think we could probably have another conversation on another day about that.
I agree. And I'm sure even connected to the topic we're talking about today, how liberation and pleasure are very much aligned too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So listen, what we typically do is we do a breathing exercise just to get started. I see Nicole's on. Thank you for joining, Nicole. And we say who we're breathing for. Usually we have more people come onto the chat, share who they're breathing for. This week, Leah, I'm breathing for the 6 children that were killed due to drive-by shootings and violence. A couple of weeks ago, I was breathing for the families of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and Rayshard Brooks. Now I'm breathing for these babies and for their families because there is an uptick of violence. That always happens in the summer anyway, but I do think that this particular summer is really different with regards to the quarantine, with regards to the racial unrest. And so I'm breathing for those families because they were just living their lives and did not expect on a 4th of July weekend that their babies would be killed. And I can't even imagine, and I know you have a little one, I just can't even imagine the pain that these families are still going through. So I'm breathing for them. Who do you think that you want to breathe for?
I this morning, like we're going to breathe for someone, I was thinking, and the first person that came to my mind was Breonna Taylor, because that still feels like the ultimate violation, to be in your own home, your own room, and not be safe in that space. So that's weighing very heavy on me today.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, the ultimate violation, to not be safe in your own space and assume that you're okay, and then you're not, right?
Be able to have your guard in that space and not actually be able to.
Right, exactly. Okay, I appreciate that. And then Nicole says she's breathing for the souls ravaged by unrest, hurt, and sadness. So more people come onto the chat and share. Charlotte, I see you're on. Tell me who you're breathing for. What we do, and Gwinnette's on. Good morning, Gwinnetta. We get relaxed. We put our middle finger to our thumbs, or our one hand over the next, on our lap, or to the side. And we try to kind of loosen up a little bit. At the sound of my voice, I count to 3, and I ask everyone to breathe in through their nose, hold it for 8 seconds. We started doing that in honor of George Floyd, who had a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So we hold it for 8 seconds and then we let it out. We try to remind ourselves that we're breathing in oxygen, because a lot of times we have shallow breathing. We're so busy these days and we're so caught up in everything that we don't even recognize that the breathing is allowing oxygen to come in and, resonate within our essential organs. So we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide, but we also breathe in hope and love, your middle name, love. We breathe in peace and serenity and kindness and care. And we also breathe out worry, fear, unrest, anxiety, and anger and rage. Okay? All right, let's go. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. One last time, crew. Make it count. Breathe in. And out. That felt good, right?
Very.
So I want the crew to continue to do this throughout the day, to bring in that oxygen and bring in those good vibes and breathe out the negative ones. Charlotte says she's breathing for Black and Brown community. And so let's get into the conversation. I'm excited. I'm excited to be with you. I want to start out, Leah, by thanking you. I've been following ever since we connected several months ago on the Terraman Hall. So I've been following your IG and following some of your writings. I feel like it's your emotions, your feelings. You are extremely transparent. And even when I'm practicing and I'm seeing, I'm working with clients, a lot of times what some of my clients are saying is that they don't feel like they're getting the solidarity from their white brothers and sisters, especially my young people, and they're calling the Gen Zs, they're calling their friends out on it like, hey, if you're not posting, because they're always on social media, if you're not posting that you're with us, then maybe that means you're not with us, right? And so I want to read a post that you had on IG, and the picture, and I wondered if it was someone you knew that drew the picture. It said, "White silence is violence." Was that somebody that you knew that posted that?
Me and my 2-year-old who did it, and we did it with a group of people in the community before protesting. So we made a bunch of different signs.
Awesome, awesome. So this says, Leah, these are your words. White silence is violence. In the grocery store, the meeting, the dinner table, the text thread, the car ride, in the relationship, and the conversation with children on a date. I believe that if I don't know what to do or say to empower Black people in this moment, it is not because I don't have the tools, but because I have to better educate myself on the history of white supremacy. This is part of my history. The more understanding we develop about our true stories, the more we feel. The more in touch we are with our feelings underneath the shame and guilt, the more we build a liberatory consciousness, and take action not just as behavioral intervention, but because we are impelled to. A force that keeps building continually and sustainably within us. Part of self-awareness and therefore self-love is holding a mirror up to myself and allowing others to do the same. Seeing everything, the ugly side too, saying, this is who I am, this is where I come from. The only way to change reality is to be in it. The goal of getting to know my story is not for my personal betterment, but for making the empowerment of Black people critical to the mission on this planet. I believe in the interconnectedness of all beings. I believe that my liberation is connected to the Black people and non-Black persons of color. For white people, steps we take toward collective wellness and healing might not feel good, but that is an indicator that we are moving in the right direction, not the wrong one. For white people, amplifying voices of people of color does not take the place of developing our own true story, our own stance or our own position, our own stake in dismantling racism. Amplifying doesn't mean we are passive in the fight. It means we step aside and along with, in honesty and solidarity, a two-step. Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate you sharing that. And when you asked me to be on the show with you, I felt so honored because you don't owe me anything, even a thank you. This is my responsibility. I sit in these positions of power. I sit in safety in my home right now because of what Black people have done for me. So it feels for me like this is a minimum piece of my reparations, just a little piece of it. So it feels like such a gift to be here with you today.
Well, thank you. It's a gift for both of us. And the reason why I say thank you is because we need you, right? We need you in the fight with us. We cannot do this by ourselves, right? And years ago, when we talk about slavery, and, one of my heroes is Harriet Tubman, right? And she says that she went back 22 times. She says she would have gone back more and freed more slaves had they known that they were slaves. But I also recognize that there were abolitionists. They were white people along the way that made that transition, that Underground Railroad, a possibility. And now we've got to keep the conversation going. But what happens, Leah, is that people won't be courageous like you. There are white men and women that continue to be super spreaders, right? And when we're thinking about COVID-19, right, and there is a very real correlation here. that there are people out there that will actually be asymptomatic, be super spreaders of this virus of COVID-19, and not care about the fact that they don't wear masks that could be helpful to someone else, including their own family. And I felt, what an amazing correlation that we were all sent into our homes to think about things for months in quarantine. And that now we have to reconcile the super spread of racism and how that continues to perpetuate itself. And so I want to ask you to share a little bit about your emotions with relates to, and you were breathing for Breonna Taylor, but how do you feel when you think about those deaths of the last, there's 4, but there's also been lots of violence over the last couple of weeks, but the ones that we know the words, the names of. As a white woman, how do you feel about it? And what do you say to the people in your community who are white about that?
Thank you for that question. So I first want to respond to what you said about kind of the relationship between COVID-19 and racism, and it's connected to this question about feeling. And I think what I'm noticing is white people in general around racism don't want to identify with it, right? And similarly with the people without the mask, I'm fine, I don't have it, I'm not at risk. And that is the first go-to that white people feel about racism. I don't have it because I'm not intentionally mean or bad, right? And have to separate intention from impact, because regardless, if the person's not wearing a mask out in the world, they might not intend to pass it on, but that might exactly be the impact, right? And it's similar with racism, is it's less about it sort of like, do I mean to do this, and more about I have it in me, right? Like it's possible. It's very possible. So when I really think about that question, I look at how we try to distance ourselves from the emotion as white people, from the problem as white people. And in the post that I wrote, whenever I've been hearing this question of, am I doing enough? I don't know what to do. It goes back to feeling, right? And there's this phrase like white people take action, which I think is essential, but it can't just be this thing that we try, a donation that we make, or a word that we say in one meeting. It has to be something that comes from deep heart work. So when you ask me how I feel, in my body, I've felt nauseousness, I've felt fury, but I don't spend too much time thinking about how that is necessarily about George Floyd per se. I spend time thinking about, what am I doing with those feelings, and how are those feelings an indication of my own disgust in myself, right? How racism lives with me. And if I'm so nauseous, if I'm so sick about this, what am I doing in every single interaction to make sure that that doesn't happen again? So I spend time connecting to that feeling, but I don't stay in it as a place to feel the shame and the guilt wash over me. And I also don't try to couple it with Black emotions on this topic. I had a friend and colleague share with me, sometimes when white people talk about grief, it's like they're the distant friend showing up at the funeral and claiming closeness. Right? It's like my emotions on this aren't necessarily important to you right now. My action is what's important. And it's really what I do with those feelings and how I sit in them to use them as fuel, not as a way of letting myself have a pass.
Yeah, so that's important. I talked to, a couple of weeks ago, Mel Robbins, and I said to her, how are you talking to your kids about this? And she said, quite frankly, my kids they're having a difficult time because they're saying, like, Mom, this is hard to talk about this, right? And she said something I thought was really powerful. She said, good, it's not meant to be easy. And if it's hard for you to talk about it, can you imagine how hard it is for Black and brown people to live it? Right. And so that I thought was a wonderful connector when we're thinking about courageous conversations connect. How do we connect with each other through empathy, but also being transparent and honest and truthful. And I like what you said in your post, like with the good and the bad, right? And even the ugly parts of our history that really don't feel good.
No, exactly. Like when I think about going back to my ancestors, I think about the awful things my ancestors did, right? And I think what we're witnessing with people who say sort of all lives matter or really hold on to those sort of phrases is an unwillingness to look at your own pain that we have carried from white supremacy too. Like, as a white person, I have to figure out what my stake is in this, right? Not do it out of the goodness of my heart, but really figure out like, what is the ickiness in me and how might I spew that out and harm other people? That is my history to take ownership of.
Right. And people don't want to take ownership. Nicole says she's got a question. She says, sitting in with COVID and sitting in with racism has not been by accident. We are all together a part of a spiritual awakening. We are connected with an awareness that is tying us to our ancestral lineage. This is a powerful time. Mm-hmm. I agree. Mm-hmm. I agree that none of this is by accident. I do believe that there is a spiritual awakening that is happening, which is a great thing, right? But I also agree that with those kinds of realities come a lot of fear. And I'd like you to speak to the fear that you may be experiencing with maybe your white brothers and sisters around those that dig their heels in and just deny that they have any implicit bias, deny that they're racist, deny that slavery even existed. Like there's all this denial that is very hard to penetrate.
Yeah.
Can you say that?
Yes, very much so. Well, I really want to approach this with honesty and vulnerability and speak from the shaky place inside of me, because I think what sometimes well-meaning white liberals do is they show up and they wear their ally flag, right? And look at all the ways I'm advocating for justice and like me, Dr. Arji, right? And I think we end up doing way more harm that way because it is very normal and appropriate to not trust white people if you are a person of color in this country, right? And so by just trying to show all the ways we are good, we actually do more harm and create more distance rather than say, let me speak from this honest, shaky place. And so in terms of the fear, when you invited me on this conversation, I was like, whoa, this is a big responsibility. And I noticed I was excited and I noticed I was nervous, and I sat with it. And I said, what am I really nervous about? And what I was nervous about is that the racism that is in me, because I interrogate it and I've worked on it, but there is still stuff there just by nature of living in a racist society and growing up as white. I'm afraid that that's going to come out, right? And so typically when we feel fear, we run from it. We want to retreat rather than confront and interrogate the fear. And so for me, in these conversations with white people, it's looking at the ways that healing doesn't feel good, that the trauma recovery and the disgustingness that I carry in me to eradicate that isn't going to feel like a good and happy process. Mm-hmm. And what I've been talking about in the circles that we facilitate for different racial identities and then cross-race discussions in the white circles is when you feel shame, it doesn't mean you are shamed, right? Like you're not being shamed by a person of color. You have shame within you, and we have to look at what that is so that you can confront these emotions and use them for action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, one, for your transparency. And for even sharing that discomfort that you talk about when I reached out to you and said, would you come on the show and talk about this from your perspective? Because the goal is to have these healthy, interchangeable conversations that will hopefully reverberate and go out.
Yes.
You know, you and I talking, my hope in this show, that it gives permission for other Black and brown women to talk with other white women about these shaky places, right? Because if we don't do it and we don't show up and in a courageous way, then other people are not. They're going to go to their circles, right? And that is necessary, right? So let me go back for a moment. I feel like it's necessary for white women and white brothers and sisters to talk to other white brothers and sisters about what their discomforts are and keep engaging, and for Black people to talk and brown people to talk with each other about our own internalized racism, because we have it too. And it shows up in lots of places where we're not kind to ourselves, right? And yet we want everybody else to be kind to us. We're two sides of the same coin, and we're a part of the same thread, that fabric, that we grew up in this system where the system was designed to oppress us. And for white people, the system was designed to elevate you all, right? So therefore, it's this idea that white people are superior and Black people and brown people are inferior. That is two sides of the same thread. The only way we get to a place where there's true equality is if we have these conversations, and then we begin to take action together to dismantle these systemic and structural inequities.
I love that. I completely agree. I think the thing that feels more particular to white people is that in order to have these courageous conversations, white people need to work on what it is that unsettles them, that makes them defensive. So for example, I meant to say this at the beginning of the conversation. If I say anything, if I take up space in a way that doesn't feel good to you, Dr. RG, I want to know it. And my vow to you is that I will take that in and handle it with ownership and vulnerability. And I think what ends up happening in some of the cross-race conversations that we facilitate at the Well or at Spoke Circles is white people get so afraid about messing up and being seen as bad or mean or racist. It's a part of them they don't want to identify, that they defend themselves. And every single time they do that, that is a moment of harm for a person of color. That is a moment of exclusion. That is a moment of re-traumatization. That is saying, you don't belong here because I can't tolerate what your experience is. So these conversations need to happen, but white people need to do the work to ask themselves, if I am confronted on my racism, what does that mean if it's true, right? What does that mean if that's, because that is what the, no, not me, all lives, I'm good. I have a Black friend. I run a, like that, all of that like defensiveness that comes out. That's really the question is like, what does it mean if what you're saying to me is real? What does that say about me?
Yeah. So, that's one of the things that really is annoying to me when white people say, I have a Black friend. Like that, that I think white people don't understand that is possibly one of the most racist things that you can say, is that this then disqualifies me about being racist because I have one friend who's Black who likes me.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't disqualify you. Not growing up in this system that we've all grown up in together. And so I was thinking about when I was at Drexel. I grew up there, literally. I got 2 degrees from there, and I had 2 positions there. One as a forensic family therapist and one as the director of clinical training. And I can remember sitting in faculty meetings and white people saying, we don't feel safe. Because they implicitly assumed if Black women, in particular myself and my colleague who was the chair, were direct, that then internalized, their interpretation of that was that we were the angry Black woman. And it would happen not just with the faculty, but it would also happen with the students. So I would get emails that I'm not warm and fuzzy. And I would think to myself, well, the program director is a white male. He's not warm and fuzzy either, but he's not getting emails saying that he's not warm and fuzzy. And so I started speaking up without hesitation, because I felt that if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And the clapback was pretty fierce. Right. It was that, you're not a team player and you're not creating this safe environment. And to your point about that many white people can't tolerate it. And my position was, if we don't speak the truth, then I don't feel safe.
Yes.
right? Because I walk through the world not feeling safe anyway, no matter whether I'm driving or golfing or bird watching or walking or breathing or laying in my bed in my home, in my room. I don't feel safe. So at the very least, if we could have these honest conversations and you can tolerate, I prefer accept, but okay, we'll start with tolerate. If you can tolerate my truth, then maybe we have some room to grow here. But if you shut it down because you simply can't handle it, then we can't grow together.
Right. And what does that really say about me as a white person and not being able to accept and to take in? And I really appreciate you using this word safety. And I'm hearing that a lot from white folks. And I think there's a huge difference between discomfort and safety, right? That like, the only person that you're describing that was unsafe in these interactions with white people was you. They were uncomfortable with what was coming up for them, but that doesn't mean their safety is threatened, right? And I think that when I'm sitting in my work meetings and when I'm sitting in different mixed communities, what my question is how can I amplify the people of color in the room to ensure that I'm the one that puts my neck out, right? Like, so I get in trouble by the big boss if that's what's really going to happen, because I have a ton of safety. I can be mad, I can show up late, I can be pregnant, I can be all of those things, and no one's going to question my intentions, right? I have a nice bubble around me. So it's my job to pop that bubble and say, what do you think? What do you need? How can I support you and be there with you to take the risks, but make sure your voice is at the center of it?
Right. I agree. I definitely agree. There, unfortunately, are not enough white brothers and sisters that are willing to take those risks because of the fear that you talked about. Now, I am hopeful because since George Floyd, which we know that this has been going on, the only difference, I think Will Smith said this, is that, brutality against unarmed Black people is not new. The difference is now we have social media and videos. That's the difference. Yeah. So George Floyd to me was an Emmett Till moment.
Yes.
Where the world now could see the brutality and the viciousness that has been going on for 401 years. And the other difference was we were all home. Everyone was home. We weren't in the busyness of life as we normally are, moving and shaking and overscheduled and out and about. So people actually almost in real time got to see the breath leaving this man's body for no good reason other than he was Black.
Yes.
Right? And so you can't unsee that. You can deny it, but you can't unsee it. And that's why I'm hopeful, because I do believe that people are willing to at least stay in the conversation a little bit, and not run away, not defend, not deflect, and not run.
Yes.
That's the goal here, right?
Yeah, it's like you're saying, stay in the conversation, but also what are you willing to give up, right? Like, I think what really is at the core of this is white people have had so much power, right? They have been elevated to that position non-accidentally, that once you start to sit with the feelings, you realize, oh, I have to give something up. And I'll give an example with myself. So we have these circles at Spoke Circles, which are places where people can come and work through challenging issues. And we're holding.
Yeah, how long have you have the Spoke Circles? Because that you founded that, right?
Yeah, we co-founded it, but it's a collaborative business model. So all of the different facilitators of different identities and races come together and we develop the model together. And each facilitator runs their own space. I don't interrupt that. Like, you know what to do based on your own training, your identity, and I want you to lead from that authentic space. So we've had it for 2 years, And we've really pivoted to focus specifically on this topic of how do we talk about race, both in our affinity groups for white people to work through their shit, and in other spaces, non-Black people of color and Black people to have healing and reflective spaces. And so these groups were going well, and I realized I was charging for people of color's groups. And I said to myself, I'm a white woman profiting off of Black healing. Like, that is the truth of this. How do I feel about that, right? And so I made those groups free and took a business hit. That's something that I need to give up because that doesn't feel good to me. But I was doing it because it's so unconscious, right? Like, that's just what I do. It's a business. I'm a white leader. I make money. But that is not okay, right? And I think these are the conversations that white people have to have. Is like, in your CEO position, in your leadership position, in the home that you own, in where you invest your money, right? What are those banks? Who runs them? What do you need to shift? And so that's the question that I've been sitting with white people is what needs to shift in your life in order for you to give something up so that you are also more free, but that you also are investing in the liberation of people of color.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Charlotte says, such a good conversation. Thanks, Leah, for being transparent. And then Debbie Pearson says, it is necessary for me to feel uncomfortable. Sitting with it is important. I do think it's something that as a white woman and really not good at, and the discomfort and fear that I'm going to say something wrong is something that I need to break through and just stay in it. That's what she says.
Yeah, can I comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, because I think, and I've definitely been there, Debbie, and I sometimes find myself there now. And I think even in our whiteness of being afraid of being good at it is an example of an expression of white supremacy. Because we think everything we say matters so damn much.
Right.
That is how important we are. That we can say one Black thing and we break a Black person, right? And it's not to say we should be reckless, we should be thoughtful, we should be reflective, we should be doing this work, but that it's also a reminder that anytime my mind is going to me, I check the white supremacy. Oh, there's that voice. I'm so important. I can shatter the world. I can make the world better. Is that really true? Right?
That's good. There was, even before George Floyd passed away, we were talking about Ahmaud Arbery. This was back in May, Leah, and we were engaging in a good discourse on this show. And there was a woman, we were talking about Black people who can't ride a bike without, in this case with Ahmaud Arbery, he was checking out a house. My husband and I have done that hundreds of times. We like looking at houses and what the structures are, what have you. So that's what he was doing. And other white people had done it. They weren't chased and gunned down and killed, but he was. So we were talking about how when we show up just doing our everyday task or interest, that is a threat, if you will. So there was a white woman who had been following us on this platform who then texted in the chat that she lived in a certain place where Black people hadn't treated her so well. And they got into a conversation within the crew about the fact that we really weren't talking about that in the moment. And that reminded me of when we say Black Lives Matter, and then white people say, but all lives matter. And it's a deflection. And to your point about this fear that if you say something wrong, that is going to then be the end of the world, because of course white people will say something. It's all right, if you will, right? So I think that to a certain degree, that there has to be a dismantling of that as well. And to your point about what are you willing to give up? And that's a problem, because I don't think that many white people, not all white people, but share the space well, right? Because we've been brought up in the system that says you don't have to share.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that you feel you are owed this, right? And we have this narrative, especially in the United States, that it's endless opportunity for everyone. I got to this education. I came through the environment that I grew up in, and that is not true. I recognize that it's whiteness that got me here. Like, as a trauma survivor and someone growing up in a working class family, my whiteness is what helped me move through that, right? Like, it got me different opportunities to take me out of certain circumstances that I was in, for sure. And I think the all lives matter piece is so, like you said, it's a perfect word, Dr. RG. It's a deflection. When my white daughter with blonde hair walks out of this house, no one questions that she matters. She gets messages everywhere she goes that she matters. She doesn't need that reaffirmed for her, right? Like, that is, and that's my experience out in the world too. So to say Black Lives Matter is because we live in a society where that actually needs to be stated. Like, that's really I don't know, the mind blow. I like lose my words when I even think about that, just because of how those two feel so disconnected from each other.
Yeah. You know, so when we come back, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about this idea that we stay, one, in the conversation, and we challenge people not to quit. Yes. Because it's going to be easy for us and I've been hearing in the spaces that people are saying, I'm overwhelmed, I'm fatigued, let's just stop talking about this, and we can't. So will you stay with us?
Yes.
All right, we'll be right back. All right, so we are back. We are back with Leah Love Avellino, and she is engaging us in a great conversation about how do you stay in the conversation, how do white women and Black women and brown women and people in general of different races stay in this conversation to continue to dismantle racism, systemic racism, if you will, and the social injustices that have been around for over 401 years. And so we've got some questions here or comments too. Debbie says, this is really helpful. Thank you. So that's awesome. Marcia's on. Marcia Rose says, we are starting a group at our school, but we need help. We have started, but I'm not sure if we are on the right track. Do you have any suggestions? So that's for you, Leah. What would be your suggestions? And then Michael Brown says, great point, RG. Thank you. What are your points? What do you say to Marcia's question?
I think that your group, and I would love to hear about what types of challenges you're experiencing and the makeup of your group, because there are so many spaces, most of the world, that's predominantly white spaces, even if they are mixed. And so the first thing is to assume that there's already harm being done, right? And that goodwill and good intention doesn't mean that the impact is good. And I think what white people do in a lot of these ally spaces and task forces is they end up taking on the mission, right? And my recommendation is to listen, to take in, to ask the people of color in that space, what do you envision? What do you need? How can I support you? And not so much about how can I lead from that guilt place of being a social justice advocate. And also look at the places in the organization where there are opportunities for you to speak up, right? For you to take the heat if you're a white person in the room, and put your neck out there to deliver the message and in certain ways, so that the situation that Dr. RG dealt with in her work, that she doesn't have to leave with the icky feelings, but that the white people in the room leave with that discomfort and the icky feelings.
Yeah. And that too is so uncomfortable for anyone to feel like they're sticking their neck out, that they might lose something. They may have to give up something. They may have to share something. That said, that is something that Black people and brown people are so familiar with. We're familiar with telling our story. We're familiar with living our story. As a matter of fact, sometimes we're numb from it. And so we've told, there's two talks, right? There's the talk of when our kids go out in the world, like we're having conversations, I'm having them in a practice now where some of my young people who have come home from school are either going back to school, or there are some of my young people that are going back to college and they've made a decision whether they're going to an HBCU or they're going to a PWI. The conversation is different when they're going to a PWI. Like, you do understand that probably you've been around white people who you've grown up with that will treat you differently than the people that you are going to encounter at this predominantly white institution that you don't know. They're going to see you differently. That's the talk. So what do you need to do to keep yourself safe? And what do you need to do to stand up for yourself if you find that even in the classroom, there will be implicit bias by your instructors that treat you differently or assume different things about you than your white counterparts? Those are the talks that we're having with our kids, and even in therapy, that white students, white people don't have to have with their young people.
Right. You're carrying that instead of the white people carrying that responsibility. And I think to that person's question, I'm so sorry I didn't see your name pop up. The other piece of it too is creating procedures and policies for addressing aggressions and talking about how we approach repairs, right? Because I go into a space thinking, okay, I'm doing a lot of work, but how could I do harm? How is this me, the person that can do the harm? Not how is this not me, right? And so that needs to be part of the policy that we create, is how do we take ownership as white folks? And how is that part of the discussion here of we need to do this, so what do we need in order to do that, right?
Yeah, I love that. So Mahatma Gandhi says, we must be the change we wish to see in others. And this is what I hear you saying, that the ownership is on us or on white people to be that change, to create that change, but listen first, right? So I came up with this acronym. I wonder what your thoughts about it are. It's SLACK. It's cutting ourselves some slack. So it's how we show up. That's the S. The L is listen, learn, and then lead, right? That's a shared leadership, taking the leadership, even if that means that you allow other people to amplify their voices in that space. The acknowledgement, right? How are we acknowledging all of it, including the lies that were told in order to sustain and maintain systemic racism? There has to be an acknowledgement, because if you don't acknowledge it, then ultimately you can't move. And then the commitment, the C is for commitment, staying committed to it, not just checking out. I'm seeing too many people tapping out, too many people saying they're exhausted, they don't want to talk about it anymore. You know, haven't we protested enough? Let's just move on, right? So it's got to be a commitment. It can't be a label. I was slightly annoyed that they changed the label on the Quaker Oats, the Aunt Jemima, label, and Uncle Ben's. I'm like, it's not just the label. Who is in the C-suite? Who are the people at the top that are making the decisions? If you just do this rhetoric of giving a little bit of a blurb that Black Lives Matter and you do nothing else, that's just more of the same. So are you committed? And then the last acronym for K is kind, right? Now that doesn't mean that just because you're kind and nice that you get a pass. But it does mean that you have to really search yourself to see, are you showing up in a way that is kind to your counterpart, your brother and sister, whoever you sit in that space with? Tell me your thoughts about that.
I love it. So beautiful. It's so bold, but also has kind of like a welcoming approach to it. I think what I would say for white people is really looking at this as a messy process, and the discomfort that you're feeling is an indicator that you're going in the right direction, not the wrong, right? So as we're hearing a lot of people say, I'm exhausted, I don't want to do this anymore, can I go back to posting pictures of my cheese plate on Instagram yet? The answer
some selfies, right? Selfies.
Exactly. Like, I want to go back to the selfie. I want to just go back to how things were for me. And that is an indicator that you're feeling discomfort, and don't allow that to have you step away. Follow this acronym SLACK over and over again. And I think what you put together is so beautiful, and that white people need to make systems out of each of those words. Because if we rely on our weak will to continue to commit, we are going to fail. That isn't it. So for example, for me, it was like, I am in an undoing whiteness group every week. That is what, because that is not acceptable. It cannot go back in the back of my mind. And the way that our society is set up is that it will, right? We'll be lulled back in. That is how the silence works, that we've done it over and over and over again. And so it's, those words are so powerful, but it's like, so what do I need to do to make sure I can commit? What do I need to work on to make sure I can be kind? How skilled am I at deep listening? What do I need to build to listen, right? So it's not just practicing it in real time, but it's also like, how can I embody this with systems I put in place in my life?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. White fragility. White fragility is annoying. I have to tell you that it exhausts me. There is the new word, the Karen, Karens out there. That, and I've seen some videos. I manage my in the intake of some of the videos that I've seen of white women. But we'll just say Amy Cooper, who dialed the police and said, I'm going to say that you're an African-American male and you're threatening me, knowing that she was weaponizing those words, and that the words and the optics of this Black man and this white woman could potentially get her what she wanted, right? Which was to be distant from this Black man, and to get her also him to, be arrested, if you will. Can you share anything about challenging this whole concept of white fragility?
Yeah. So it's so challenging because, like, when I hear that, my inclination is to not be patient with this woman and use it as a way to have a courageous conversation with her, right? Like, and there are certain people that we might never reach, that's just the reality of it. And at the same time, there are a lot of white liberal people who feel very fragile, right? And I think any resistance that we notice, my approach with white people and with myself is just to get curious about it. Curiosity is the antidote to shame. So I follow up, instead of saying something to her about like how I might feel about her behavior authentically in that moment, I connect with, what is my intention here? My intention is to connect with this person in order to shift something. And so we approach it as a white person, if I approach it like that, is what is so unsettling to you about this interaction with a Black man? Like, let's just get curious about that together. What are those fears really about? What are the messages that you got? And I think this is my job as a white person. I don't think that's your job at all, but I think that's really it, is how do we support white people in getting curious so that they don't shut down in the shame place?
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea. I use the acronym CURIOUS, not furious, because you can get furious, right? And you can just focus on the behavior, and and then before you know it, like, then the relationship has shut down, right? And then you get nowhere. Right. And so I really appreciate that sort of curiosity about where you're at, and not just making an assumption, but creating that space to really process the conversation so you can move the needle forward. White people have a difficult time acknowledging a lot of this. And you're right. I hear you saying that there's some people that you're not going to shift. They're not going to change. My challenge sometimes is that for those people that are not going to change, that they also are spewing this racist sort of ideology, the super spreaders, to their children. And so what was horrifying to me is right after George Floyd, I saw a challenge, and it was a challenge of young, white, mostly males that were, I believe, on Snapchat or one of the other social media platforms, and they were emulating the knee on the neck of George Floyd. And the caption was, "I can't breathe." Did you hear about that? Yeah. And it doesn't feel good, right? That it's one thing, I guess, not that any of it is acceptable, but if you've got somebody who's steeped in their racist ideology and they're, let's say, a 50-something-year-old man, because I saw those videos too, and I'm like, okay, kind of get that. But these teenagers were passing this around. And the thing about it was the teenagers that I'm working with, and I work with all races, but these were Black teenagers that I was working with that are living in white communities that were actually seeing these images and were coming to therapy being re-traumatized because it's their friends that are doing these challenges. And so that to me it feels almost defeating. Yes. Because we know that we're going to have a challenge with our age contemporaries, but we have hope sometimes that the Gen Zs get it, and many of them do. They're out there protesting, but many of them don't because they're getting the rhetoric from the people that they love, their family members. So, what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so it's when you say that, like, the horror and just thinking about how your clients or your patients are coming in to work through their stuff and get support, and then they have to be re-traumatized by what's happening in their community. And I think there's two things. I think I like to think on an interpersonal level, and then I like to think on a systems level. The first thing is interpersonally, there's a lot of hypocrisy with white folks, and there's a lot of hypocrisy in our nation around whiteness, right? Like there's a lot of messages that might promote transparency and talking, but we don't actually do that. We don't like to name things that white people do in our country, right? We like to name the victories. And so what I'm noticing a lot in the families that I'm working with and supporting these white families and talking about race is they might be supporting a cause outside of their home, donating, but their kids are singing racist rhymes, right? Ring around the rosy, blah, 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 blah. And so the work starts with you as a parent, right? We like to think we can impart positive things on our kids, but if we aren't doing that deep work, it's going to show up in our homes. That's one piece of it. But then the other piece of it is the systems. We cannot rely on individual parents and families to shift the paradigm. So how are schools being monitored for curriculum? Inventory of the books that are read in the classroom. Who are the writers? What are the stories of history that are being told? How do we start to work at that top level to shift so we don't have to rely on just what's happening in individual families? Because that's a harder shift. That's the one by one versus thousands of kids are going into schools and reading about our nation's true story and elevating voices of Black people. That's where the shift happens for youth, I think.
Yeah. I appreciate that too, because I was working with some mothers the other night who are, talking about just their challenges with their kids. And one of the questions was a teacher who said that she felt that she had been a little bit too graphic in talking about the horrible history of our nation with regards to lynching to her child. And one of the things that I said was that this is part of the problem. No, we don't want to re-traumatize our children by sharing these gruesome things. And there is age-appropriate conversations to have. Simultaneously, being silent harms them more because then they're not prepared for what is happening in their world. And we cannot watch them 24/7. So just like I would say when I worked with sexual abuse survivors group for many years with my church, and they would say, well, how old does your child have to be for you to talk about good touch, bad touch, or predators? And I said, when they can speak, right?
They have a voice,
right? When they can speak, and when you can use language that they can understand, then we begin to talk about it at that level.
Right.
Right? We wouldn't wait until they're 10 years old to teach them a language. No. Right?
Exactly. And I think anytime as a white person, we notice, oh, this feels like too much, this is too hard, just mark that as the white supremacy and the resistance, right? That you have felt like you were in your bubble and now that bubble has been popped. I think the complicated things that systems need to address, and I know you and I are both relational therapists, is how do we provide socio-emotional support and cross-cultural engagement resources to schools, to stores, to businesses, right? So that it's not, we open up these wounds and then we just leave kids to sort of feel the feelings and deal with it. I think that's where there's an area where we can say, oh, okay, so you're feeling overwhelmed. Let's talk about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And lastly, this has been an amazing conversation, and I hope that you come back.
Oh my God, I'd love to. It's such an honor.
And so, as we continue this conversation for Black and Brown and white people, in terms of the courageous conversation that connects, how will you continue the work and how will you carry this mantle with regards to making sure that in your community, other people are doing the same?
That's a really great question. So the first thing is always starting with myself, sort of locating myself. Where am I at? Where do I still need to work through? Where are my points of resistance, right? And really making sure to be honest and transparent about that. The second thing is centering justice and equity in every single interaction. So a lot of businesses right now are hiring someone to do diversity and inclusion. There's a task force over here, and it's like, no. It's gotta be here. We cannot talk about wellness. We cannot talk about finance. We cannot talk about education. We can't talk about enforcement without any of those things, without justice being at the center. So for me, it's continuing the conversations. It's not assuming people of color in my life want to talk about race with me all the time. So it's checking in and making sure that that feels good and okay. And then lastly, really thinking about the things that I can continue to give up. Like, am I the right person to be in the leadership role? How can I use my voice but step aside from that role? And working with the fear.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And Yolanda says, this has been great, absolutely necessary conversation, needs to be replicated over and over. Agree. C-suite needs to be dismantled, if not diverse. Love Slack. And Michael Brown says, white conservatives believe that white privilege is not real. I have seen them in a trick of liberal press. How much racial tension around racism fall on political lines, and will white conversations want to have tough excuse me, what did you say? White conservatives, I'm sorry. Will white conservatives want to have a tough conversation around race? So I just wanted to kind of make sure that I wrap up with most of the people that have comments. Debbie says the curriculum in schools has to really be thrown out. It is difficult as a teacher to challenge it when the administration is not open to having teachers do anything else. The whole thing needs to be dismantled. All great comments. How can people find Julia? Share anything so that people can make sure that they are tapping into your community and your goals and how you are putting this space, this good stuff out in the space.
Thank you for that. So you can find me on Instagram at Leah Love Avellino. And should I put it in the live comments, Dr. RG? I don't think I can.
Morgan will put it in there for you.
My name is right here, correctly spelled, so you can do that. And there you can connect to different support circles with different facilitators on a variety of topics, as well as any writing that I do on this topic. So I would love to hear from all of you, and this has been such a privilege. And before we end, Dr. RJ, I just want to check in and see, like, how did this feel for you? Is there anything that didn't feel good to you that I can own?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Actually, nothing. I feel that what was most helpful for me was your authenticity and your transparency. And oftentimes when we're in these kinds of conversations, when people are running away from their truth or my truth, if you will, then that doesn't feel comfortable. But this felt really, really good. And I just enjoyed your energy. I enjoyed you speaking truth to the space and in connecting with the crew. We stand for Connecting Relationships for Epic Wins. And I just hope you come back and that we continue our relationship.
Thank you so much for sharing this space with me and inviting it on. I would love to continue our relationship in literally any capacity.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks for coming on, and we will touch base soon, okay?
Sounds good.
All right.
Dr. Archie, and thanks all of you for your beautiful questions and your time. I appreciated meeting you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And we are going to take a quick break, guys. We're going to, and then we'll come back and we'll just wrap up, okay?
Are you sometimes feeling out of sync and you don't know why? Do you ever feel like you just need to talk with someone about your circumstances? Dr. RG has provided professional therapy to thousands of individuals, families, and couples just like you. No longer do you have to believe there is nothing you can do. Having a therapist and coach to help you process what you feel is what you need. Dr. RG is known for working with marriages and couples to develop the skills to have courageous conversation and incredible transformation in their lives. Schedule an appointment today. Call 215-789-6999. Dr. RG is healing families one relationship at a time and transforming relationships one courageous conversation at a time. Schedule your appointment today.
And this has been Courageous Conversations Connect Space. The Quarantine Talks. Wasn't Leah Love Avellino wonderful? That conversation was off the chain. I just am so appreciative of her authenticity. I'm appreciative of her transparency. I'm appreciative of the work that she's doing in her spaces and places. We need more of that in terms of our white allies to be honest with where they're at, and so that we can move the needle forward, dismantling systemic racism, as well as dismantling all the structures that have been developed to keep Black people oppressed and to keep white people in positions of power and privilege. And so what is a great conversation. Thank you so much, crew. Yeah. Yes, please tag this, share it with your friends, share this video so that other people who could not watch in real time can experience this conversation. Going over to our YouTube page, please, and hit subscribe and hit that notification bell that's Ask Dr. RG, AskDrArgie. If you want more of these kinds of conversations, let us know. Give us the thumbs up and the smiley faces, and even let us know who you might like for us to reach out to have to come on the show. This is the Courageous Conversations Connect Space, where we're having our quarantine talks every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 10 a.m. So thank you guys for being a part of this, part of our crew, and we love you. There's nothing you can do about it. Have a beautiful day on purpose from our heart to yours.